1, 2, 3. Okay.
That's like a Mexican lifetime. If you talk to a Mexican, he says, we are born, we eat beans, we grow up, we fart, and then we die. And that I thought was a fart.
We've got our first question here, isn't it?
Read it out.
Where do swales originally come from?
The original swelling is Old Deutsch, and it is S-W-E-Y-L-E. Also, an alternative word for that is Austrumtaler. Stick that up your jumper. With an umlaut, Austrumtaler, and they come from the recessional lines of moraine left by the 4 ice sheets that came over northern Europe, and the bits in beneath are the swales, and the whole series are called Austrumtaler. Okay? They are a natural feature of a lot of places. They are hollows in which water lies for 1 to 3 days and then slowly drains away. How do I know all this? I've got little doors in my brain. Mostly they don't open.
Yeah, you will find it in the Old English literature, the word swell, but you'll also find it in modern mapping in America.
Yeah.
You'll find the word swell. And often what's called a swell in America, I think often are old beaver dams. They're filled in, ancient beaver dams. I tried to track them down across the landscape, and I kind of got a feeling they were old, real ancient beaver dams filled up, silted up and hollowed out and still receiving water, I don't know. But you will see swale termed as a natural feature on an American map. It's not the same as our constructed swale.
I've given a permaculture course in every state in America with the sole exception of
Alaska.
What?
Alaska?
No, we've given them everywhere. The Weddell swale is widely distributed in America due to my efforts.
Okay, here's a different one. Do different plants prefer different particular patterns in which to be planted?
Oui, pourquoi pas? Certainement. If you take the banana circles we gave you with a sort of quite small diameter of 12 bananas, you can't do that with you can do it with papaya, but only just. But with most things you can't. And it's the same with a coconut circle. It's 25 coconuts. They're all pretty straight. And they do it because they sort themselves out, but you can't do it with mangoes. So trees, yes, they need their own geometry to suit their shape and habit, obviously. You want to add to that, sir?
Palms generally, I think, can be planted in circles because they don't have any lower branches. I've tried putting in, or I have put in plum pine, jelly palm circles. They're a great one, Bootea capitata.
Pretty good.
Any palm, I think, will work. Papayas, we're putting papaya circles. Got to be a little bit careful with root rot. If they get too damp, might put a stone mulch on the outside, but papayas work. Babacos probably work because of that too.
Yeah, babacos
Some of the
die anyhow. You can't stop them. They're just generally built to die, you know, like us.
I remember reading you were going to try macadamias.
Did you? Right, I never got around to it.
Didn't get around to it? I didn't either, so someone out there ought to try macadamias. They are kind of, maybe they don't tangle too much. But otherwise, most things tangle up a bit in a circle like that.
Take silky oak. you can plant those very close, but they don't grow. As soon as you move them to within more than 20 feet of each other, they stunt each other. And you plant them really close, like 5 feet apart, that's where they stay, the size you plant them.
But when that question there, different plants and trees prefer particular patterns in which to be planted. If you're talking about pattern relationships, then there's all sorts of pattern relationships.
Yes, that's right.
Associations, the Three Sisters being a major companion planting, corn, beans and squash, the South American Indians, or South and North American Indians. The best corn, beans and squash that I ever saw were in Macedonia, of all places. All planted together, traditionally. There's a whole legend, there's all sorts of North American Indian legends about the Three Sisters and stories, quite nice stories about them. And there are many companion plantings of vegetables and trees, grapes on mulberries, and different combinations.
If you read the Georgics again sometime, I know you read it a lot when you were young, but pick it up and read the Georgics again, Virgil. He says, don't plant your grape under the olive tree, because when it grows and there's a bushfire, the olive burns like a tar barrel and destroys your grape. Doesn't it sound like Virgil? And he says, but plant the olive with plane tree, he said, and because the plane will protect it from fire. And so if you walk around old groves of grapes and olives in northern Italy, you'll find Virgil's orchards here and there, and sometimes the grape and the tree they planted it with are so close that they've flattened each other, it's one big stem. And the people with them told me that was the only grapes that didn't get rust one season when rust was very bad. So reread Virgil. I know you read it most of the time, but you know, get a little more serious about it. I can nearly quote it to you, scruple not to scatter filthy matters in your fields. That means pick up cow shit and put it all around them. Scruple not. To lead in the stream from its chuckling course and distribute it amongst your vines. So you can sit there dreaming, and you can find Virgil's grape orchards up there, not far from Florence, Siena way.
You might come across new companion planting combinations too. We found onions under olives seem to do something for the olive. We found dogbane underneath citrus works really well. We don't know why. That was a permaculture group introduction. Someone came into the permaculture group and said, I'm growing dogbane, which is a kind of smelly sort of grey herb, got a funny sort of smell, succulent-y sort of leaf. Put in dogbane underneath young citrus, around the root zone of young citrus in the subtropics, really helps them grow through their immature years to a stable, larger tree. When they're much easier to hold on to, you usually lose your citrus in the subtropics when they're small. So we all wonder why. We took a bit of dogbane, everybody planted in the permaculture group up on the Sunshine Coast, a bit of dogbane under different citrus trees, and compared the result, and they all went better. We don't know why, but it works. And it was something that someone locally brought in.
I tried garlic under roses and that's got black spots, in case anyone's interested.
That's a traditional one. Any allium family with roses, and it's probably a root exudate.
I'm glad you said that, because I was in Greece once, and old ladies in long black petticoats to get around in Greece. There was one of those sitting there. I said, could you tell me, we're looking down rows of grapes, could you tell me why there's a rose here and there on the grapes? And she stopped knitting. And she said, don't you know that? I said, no, my grandmother never told me. She was too busy thrashing me to get goose eggs out from under a geese. And she said, well, the rose is a doctor of the grape, and when the grape is ill, it goes to the rose. So stick that in your pipe and smoke it. And you put the dog bone under the rose, of course. Onward, Christian soldiers.
Sometimes you'll find really strange things too. I found Mexican tree fern, which is Schizolobium, South American tree, really sticky, growing underneath citrus, underneath peaches, or very closely planted with peaches, act like a flypaper for fruit fly. And in the fruit fly prevalent time of year, get completely stuck with fruit fly. And that was it's a Schizolobium, a Mexican tree fern.
Schizolobium, if that's the way you say it. Do you say Caesar or Kaiser? Caesar. We will say Schizolobium.
And later on, I reported that to different people in the permaculture groups. And I went in a nursery only 18 months later, and there was Schizolobium, Mexican tree fern, being sold as flytrap plant. So it had gone around, and people had picked up that it does trap fruit fly on its stem. And it's good to plant with fruit fly problem fruit trees.
There is a book on companion planting called something like Carrots Love Tomatoes or something. Yeah, read it carefully, you'll find it puts a lot of things together that don't grow in the same season. You never find them together. Yeah, check out the book.
Often, if they eat together, they grow together, like basil and tomatoes. Basil, lettuce, tomatoes. Basil, lettuce, tomatoes, nasturtium. That sort of common.
Horseradish with potatoes.
Okay, next. Can a permaculture property be aesthetically laid out without compromising the quality of the natural design?
Just before we arose, did I tell you that landscape architects invited me over here to tear me to pieces once? Yes. Well, they lay things out aesthetically, and they compromise everything. I'll show you a landscape architect designed house just out here a bit, out near, here's a little house, and there's a little pond behind it down the hill, ducks on it. There's a road here, there's a driveway, and there's it's lined with two lots of plants. Here's pampas grass, and here a pinus species, and the prevailing wind is from here, and the fire frequency there is 8 years. So he set that guy up to be blasted off the face of the earth. Yeah. And it's very aesthetic, and certain death. I told the child, I actually drove down there, I said, don't let your wife and children live here, you live here by all means. And if there's a fire, for God's sake, tell them to run, because they're not going to live in a house. There won't be anything left of that. It'll powder the concrete foundation. So, you know, frig the aesthetics, have a go at the functions. And part of the function is not to destroy people.
I think a permaculture property can only be laid out without compromising the natural design. After a while, when you recognise good functional design, it is the nicest aesthetic.
Yeah.
You recognise it very quickly as you're driving through a landscape and you see a well-designed property, it catches your eye immediately. And the rest just looks like it's maintained disorder.
And it is.
It is, yeah.
It's like you never see a well-designed house, and if you did, you sort of pull up and photograph it. Because only 1 in 10,000 have been well-designed. Mostly what you see when you look around this university, a great example, is pure shed, really. This is a jumble of crap. Better knock it down and rebuild it properly.
It's kind of changed, our attitudes have changed. What we call rainforests used to be called jungles. You know, now they're sort of more trendy. You know, and you look at a rainforest, it's pretty untidy. From a garden, landscape garden point of view. It's a really messy place, but now it's become something of interest because there's an environmental concern. I think those geometric gardens and maintained tidiness as disorder is going out of fashion. We can see the dysfunction in it. Can you create acid and alkaline areas on one property?
Yeah, of course. In fact, mainly you've got them there. There's a place in Buchan which has an ordinary old red soil of krasnosem there and creek. It's got limestone here, and this is very alkaline, this is very acidic, and we managed to get one dam in the limestone, and we got a siphon across and transferred the pH. We lightened it up. This was down to 4, and this was about 8.5. So irrigating over there with limestone water was a jolly good idea. It's on the same property. Water. They used to have a truck cart round the limestone. So don't do that, just bring it over in the water. So frequently you do. And if it's not there, you can make it. Ferric sulfate, other acid salts. Out on Coral Islands, you can make little semi-acid patches for growing things that need them.
Yeah, acid mulch trees like pine trees. Will increase the acidity if you use their mulch. And some plants like acid mulch, like strawberries, blueberries, azaleas.
Fire on.
I have white cedars self-sowing across my 10 acres. What can I graft onto the root stock to make it more productive, i.e. fruit and nuts or other timber?
That's a very weird question. White cedar is Melia zederac. You know that tree. And you've got white cedar growing, you've got a good crop because it is it's a proven insecticide. It interferes with hormones in insects which enable them to split the pupae or the skin and go to the next instar. And usually your main use for it is to put a few leaves of white cedar in warm water and wash the heads of lice-riddled children, which is what I do all over Africa. But also you can throw a good handful of the orange berries in ponds that are annoying you with mosquitoes, and the mosquito larvae can't cast the skins, therefore they die in the water. White cedar is a very valuable tree with a lot of products. It's one of 2 trees, both called the neem tree, and as you well remember, the neem is one of the trees of the Ayurvedic grove that I demonstrated to you the other day. So I wrote its name there too, neem tree. One is Melia zedaracta, and the other one, which is tropical, is a Zedaracta indica. The neem proper is a very good desert tree too. Fancy having lots of white cedars growing. Want to sell your place? That's a good crop.
There's so many of them.
I know, I was so lucky. You can make neem soap, you know. Everybody does. Lice are coming. There's a revival in lice, head lice. Ask any school teacher. They're coming back with a thump. And you could be the only thing standing between the rest of us and a lice plague.
Because I don't want 10,000 white cedar trees, I want something else.
And it is a good timber.
But I'm not allowed to cut it down.
Why?
Council won't let you cut trees down.
Ha ha ha. Well, you've got no choice. You just got to start utilising it. And of course, it'll keep the pests away from your fruit trees.
I don't have any fruit trees, I can't grow them because there's so many white cedars.
Is that true? Oh God. Some people got all the luck.
Okay, are they all big or are they all small?
They're about a metre and a half at the moment.
Well, that's not a tree yet.
No. That's classifiable as scrub.
You can cut little things down. And they probably pollard or coppers. So you could get your production and mulch or get a product off them. By cutting them and cycling them at the right time of year as pollard, you could probably grow in amongst them.
The whole tree contains azadirachtin, the leaves, the berries, bark. Bring down a bunch of little refugee Indians and they'll soon be running around jam tins collecting every berry and making soap for you.
So there's no answer to that. There's nothing I can build a rootstock.
As far as I know, there's nothing you can graft onto them. Is there anything you can graft onto them? I don't know of anything.
No, well, see, if you do, it's got to be, there are a lot of Miliaceae. You just look that up. You'd better Google Miliaceae. Right? That's family. You can't graft if you go outside the family. Do you want me to write Miliaceae?
I can understand what you're saying, so
I can't myself sometimes. Melia is the genus of your tree. The Miliaceae is the family to which it belongs. If you put that into Google, say, list me the Miliaceae, it'll give you all the trees you can graft to your cedar, and may you have a lot of fun.
Okay, how can you find out what the weeds on your property indicate?
Well, you have a few very obscure Russian references. Tell you whether you've got gold underneath. Some palms attracted to zinc bodies, and then we all know that sorrel indicates acidic conditions, and barley grass tells you salting up, and on and on and on and on. So it's a big research project to list all the things plants tell you.
Rodale Press have a few lists in their books. Maybe the biodynamic literature as some.
I think I have one in the manual too, but I'm not certain.
I have some lists in that little laptop over there. It's an interesting thing. If you take a square metre of ground, or a few square metres of ground identical, and you burn one, you get this one, you burn it, have a big fire on it. The weeds that come up are all fire weeds. They respond to fire.
Eucalypts.
And there'll be bracken and blady grass and things like that. Bracken species all over the world. There'll all be potash or potassium
Concentrators.
They're accumulators of potassium, and their germination condition is to replace potassium in the soil that has been depleted by the fire, and that's a global constant. So if you're in the Amazon, you see lots of bracken fern type stuff, and it's really dense. Doesn't matter, it's not exactly the bracken fern you know. You're just using your pattern eye. You go out to the farmer and you say, was this burnt? He'll say yes. You say when, and he'll tell you when, a month ago, 6 months ago, whatever. How many times has it been burnt since it was cut? He'll tell you. Go to the next field that looks not quite the same, but similar. Ask them, you'll get a reference on how many burns, how much burn, how often. And it's all in relation to the fireweeds, and the fireweeds burn easier each time. And if you want to stack potassium on the ground, you can mulch with fireweeds. If you mulch a patch of bracken, it shrinks by a metre. If you burn a patch of bracken, it extends by a metre. Then you go on to the same, similar or exactly the same block of square metre, and you compact this, have a dance party on it, drive the car over it 1,000 times or something, and you then look at the weed response. These weeds will come up, and they've got a great big long taproot, like Sizochusis and things like that. They're really, really hard to pull out.
Chicory.
These are a decompactor.
Chicory follows car tracks.
They decompact the ground, so this long taproot punches its way through the compacted ground. Remember, this is the same piece of ground. But this time, this hasn't been burnt, this has been compacted, and this is a decompactor, all right?
Obviously, what these weeds are doing is telling you what Jeff did to the ground.
That's right. If you plough this one and plough it up and plough it up and plough it up, then what you'll get is things like blue top and cobbler's pegs, and they'll have a real hairnet root.
And you'll have very hairy pants.
Yeah, these little seeds on cobbler's pegs stick all over you. And they're very good propagating on. And this holds the topsoil together. So this is a hairnet root, and it's holding the loose topsoil together. So you're not looking, stop looking at the weeds and start looking at the germination condition. Weeds are an indication of the germination condition. If you're in the tropics and you bare soil this and plough this or degrade it, what will come up here in the tropics particularly, and in a lot of warmer climates, will be nitrogen fixers. All different types. Trees in the wet tropics, subtropics, all sorts of bushes, and their job is to fix nitrogen quickly, which nitrogen grows a lot of leaves, which grows a lot of mulch, which protects that tiny little bit of topsoil you've got in the tropics so it can get back into a forest. Stop looking at the weeds, especially as enemies, and start looking at what the germination condition is. It's like treating the symptom and not the cause. You keep treating the symptom, you'll keep treating the symptom, and you'll never get to the cause. There are all sorts. I mean, you'll get thistles where there's iron and copper deficiency, or the iron and copper deficiency is caused by acid conditions which have locked up the iron and copper. It's just a matter of not getting prejudiced about it all and looking at the actual situation. But we need more lists. Can't think of any books. I think Peter Bennett's Organic Gardening book has a couple of references in on this.
Yeah.
There's a very interesting book just come out in the last 6 months called Pseudoscience. And it's all about weeds
Oh, that was very
and the
insulting.
conspiracy around weeds and the chemical companies and the money they make out of making you scared about weeds and prejudiced about weeds. Very interesting book, Pseudoscience. Is the herb spiral purely functional, or is it symbolic also?
Herb spiral purely functional for herbs, for culinary herbs. It's symbolic of a restless night. I couldn't sleep one night and I kept thinking, why am I always doing two-dimensional plans? I think I'll do a three-dimensional one. And then I thought, yeah, I think I'll coil up a path. I got up before dawn and built one. So it's symbolic of restless night. It's bloody efficient. I think the one I built was 3 feet across, because this is a long time ago. And it had 57 feet of bed on it, running up and something like that. It was a metre across. You could reach the middle of it. In your slippers. In your fluffy slippers, standing on the back doorstep with bobbles.
You could do a really big one. The biggest you could go would be a double like this, and they'll come up and spiral like that.
Yeah.
It's a yin-yang, and then the footpath goes over the middle.
Aborigines built one of these up at
That's the highest point.
yeah. It worked pretty well.
It was okay. It's a bit awkward because you're up here and you're on the highest point and you're trying to lean over downhill a little bit to get it. But
Yeah, you stumbled, you broke your nose on the stones supporting the bed.
Is that built up on rock? How do these bits support themselves?
There's a question. Well, sometimes we teach a group of people to build one, and what you do is you just get up. He's got all the chalk.
there you go.
That's deprivation. If you're going to build a herb spiral, just build a mound like that, and then start shaping it with stones and topsoil and stones and topsoil. But you put the mound up first.
What I think a lot of you aren't getting is that you've got really dry herbs at the top,
Yep.
and they get progressively wetter as they come down because
Or
the
on the
bottom's
sun
well
side.
watered.
It's good for herbs.
And you can even put a little pond at the bottom and grow some watercress or
Yeah.
some mint or some taro, depending which climate you're
Chuck
in.
a frog in it.
Yeah. And what you also might be missing here is, remember we were just talking about the rocks around the edges and what a hassle that is? If you straighten that up, it'll be on the flat ground, so one end wouldn't be wetter than the other unless you watered it more than the other end. This is wetter at the bottom because the water drains downhill. But the edge is wrapped around itself. So there's only one outside edge. And that can have pennyroyal or whatever ground covering herb going away from all the rocks and have a living fringe that you can actually control by walking on and compacting the living fringe. So actually no maintenance at all.
And my grandmother was always looking for pennyroyal. Why was she looking for pennyroyal? She just cut the pig's throat and was collecting blood and wanted to make black sausage. Pennyroyal is your herb of choice if you're dealing with blood in the kitchen. Like somebody slices their finger off on the slicer or something.
But if you stretch that out, you're going to have
quiet. No, quite.
12 metres,
Yes.
half a metre at the most. So you're going to have 36, 37 metres of edge to control on a surface that isn't wetter at one end than the other. 37 metres of edge with all those hassly little rocks growing all those little niches. Most of that's gone because the stacked up fertility in there grows that little fringe around the outside. So you've got hardly any maintenance around the outside of this and all the edge is wrapped up on itself. So careful of these edges. These edges can either be very beneficial or really annoying if you get them wrong. This wraps the edge right up. It's a very much an edge control system to your benefit. Spiraled up in the middle.
Purely functional.
Deserts, a little bit dry sometimes. You often see herb spirals in the desert and they're only growing rosemary and lavender because everything else has died.
You should put a little 3-foot sprinkler on, which you would need 10 of on a 30-foot bed. So it cuts your water down to 1/10 of the previous need. It's a good thing, herb spiral.
Could you share an example of a versatile tropical water system that collects water during the dry season?
Should be before the dry season.
Sorry?
Should be before the dry season, sorry.
Could you share an example of a versatile tropical water system that collects water for the dry season and drains it during the rainy season? And what elements can use the diverted water? What elements can we use to divert the water? Yeah?
The answer is certainly we can help you here. We've lived a long time, haven't we, in those conditions where it's pissing down from October on and then no rain for 5 months. And we put swales in. And within 3 years we restart a lot of the old springs and streams. So you get perennial water sources. About years 3 to 5.
Because we have a longer rainy season where everything just yellows, and it's important to drain. As far as Puerto Rico, there's a lot of damage that the rain does during the rainy season.
Not to your bananas, and not to your sweet potatoes. So you stick those right on the swales, but otherwise you plant away from downhill, and that saves them from flooding then.
You'll see a plan in the manual, the 5 acres at Tyalgum. Just 5 acres of ground that was more or less just a reasonably featureless slope. Eh? There wasn't really a valley on it. It was just a straightforward slope.
Yeah.
No real valley to pick up. And Bill installed at the top a dam really a contour dam there, off a valley.
Yeah, no, off a swale. When the swale filled, it poured into the dam.
So this pulled into this dam and stayed seasonally wet and seasonally dry for a few years before it really started to keep full of water, but still stacked it up in the landscape. When it was full, overflowed to the next, just simply a swell connected to a dam.
Correct.
Overflowed to the next, simply a swell. This one had an island as well, didn't it? That one had an island. So another swell overflowed here. If we had a full system, then this water was diverted because there's a house here. This went through a set of soakage pits on down off this side. This went through a major food forest, but surplus water was picked up in the Lotus Pond and overflowed from the Lotus Pond to what we called the Spring Dam, because this was the first one that just kept overflowing. It's the bottom of the system. But after a while, that one was quite quickly that one was overflowing. That one was overflowing. This one stayed, this food forest grew great. This stayed full. This stayed full, and in the end, that one just about stayed full. And gradually, it just stacked up water in the landscape, and yet there was no valley or catchment, really, except for putting out a swell like a gutter that fed a dam and backflooded when it was at high tide, let's say, overflowed, backflooded, overflowed. So these were just like dams with roofs with gutters, or tanks with gutters off a roof. The landscape was turned into a roof that was caught by a swell that fed a dam that backflooded and overflowed to the next dam and swell system.
I bought the place next door which had cattle on it because they kept losing money. And bloke said you couldn't give a cow a drink on that place, it was so dry. Well, I put 45 dams on it or something, and Jeff tells me he's found sites for another 20 or 30 dams or something. So by the time I'd put 45 dams on and their swales and things, there was a little river running out, and it had never been there. So you can convert dry landscapes into little chuckling streams and springs, because you don't let any water run off without soaking in.
Yeah, we
How big is a dam? I'll answer that by telling you a true story about an ABC interviewer on Bass Strait Islands, asking an old mate of mine called Hucky Maynard. He said, "Now, Mr. Maynard, when you catch mutton birds and put them in barrels, how many birds do you get in a barrel?" And Hucky said, "You give me a little bit of a barrel, I'll only get you a few birds, but you get me a decent sized barrel, by Christ, I'll get you some birds in that." That's how big a dam is.
We had a dam up the top that was, what, nearly an acre?
Yeah, about
The
that.
Y front. We had a little quarter-acre dam here and a ridge point dam up here, and swales connecting through, all the way through these systems up the top, stacking water in the landscape. A big dam in the middle ground here, probably over an acre in size, acre and a half maybe.
Probably.
Island in that one. That one went off this way.
That island's called Tasmania. I was a bit homesick. I put little convicts on there. They were what were they? Little animals like guinea pigs.
Yeah.
And when they ate all the food on the island, they swam off.
We had a big ridge running down the middle, and what we called the crossing dam here. So these two are in the middle ground. And after 7 dry years, drier than normal, Bill asked me to look after the property for him, which we did for about 3.5 years. But in that period, this dam and this dam started to run all the time. So this dam we run off, we had 2-inch pipe running over here, and this dam we had a 2-inch pipe running over here. And while I was there, we opened up the canal, which went on down here, kind of a surplus overflow point. This went over to a fish pond, went into a major fish pond, another major fish pond, and out across the road to the next part of the property. This one went across to 2 fry ponds and 2 major fish ponds. This one went on down through various ponds and ended up in a Chinampa canal system, 7 long Chinampas. And we could either overflow it this way, or we could choose to send it through a bamboo arboretum swale, down a driveway, through an animal system, and all kinds of choices. Multiple choices. The dendritic pattern increases as you go downhill. The possibilities of what you can do become endless the further you go. But the middle slopes, which the whole property was dry, but the middle slopes started to leak water, so that we had a 2-inch pipe and a 2-inch pipe and a 2-inch pipe running 24 hours a day. We had all these fish ponds with, in these fish ponds alone, we had 20,000 silver perch.
See, you build a decent sized dam, you get a bloody lot of fish in it. But you build a little bit of a dam like this, you only get a few fish.
How big was the property?
I think it was 137 acres or something.
And we sited another 29 odd dams we could carry on going.
Yeah. There's no end to the number of dams. When you're designing a property, we did that to go up to the top, and you start putting all the water catchments you can in, and the steep areas you put forest, and the rest of it, well, you can grow cabbages or whatever. Yeah,
That's a lot of water leaking out of the middle ground of a landscape, and you've got the rest of the property downhill from you.
you're up above the roof line of the houses, so you always had pressure at the houses. When you lay your water systems out properly, you don't have pumps, and you just turn taps on, and gravity kicks water out of them.
Would you have to filter the water?
That's what your stomach's for.
You have a tough stomach.
We didn't have any cattle. We had a lot of fish. But I challenge you to find any water, say Melbourne, that hasn't got a bit of fish shit in it. Melbourne's got black fish in the Yarra.
Jeff, one question. When you're doing swales in the heavy tropics, do you have to be careful because of the 10%, the 90% biomass that's on top? Can you cause more problems than salt?
You can always cause more problems than you can solve if you do it wrong. And if you put swales in too steep a country and don't forest up behind you quick enough, you can make landscape slip.
Yeah, you can slip downhill.
And you have to be careful with the shallow topsoils because as you're swaling in the tropics, you'll quickly go through the topsoil into the subsoil. So you have to be careful how you take off the topsoil, dress up the swale shape and put dress up the subsoil shaping of the swale and put the topsoil back. You don't need awfully big swales in the tropics because the growth rate is so quick.
But you do in the deserts because you only get 3 big rains a year and they're very surprisingly large. Now, that's a slump landscape in basalt, and these dots are slip lines. And as soon as you get an amateur walk on this, oh, this is a nice place to make a dam. It makes his dam, and this slip line goes active, and that goes out. So don't put dams in unstable country. And all councils map slumping country.
People often ask you how many swales across the landscape, and in some sort of slope country, and you've got a reasonable slope, it's kind of handy to work it out that the potential height of your trees give you an indication of stepping your way uphill. The steeper you get, the closer they get then, and the shallower you get, the further apart they get. But when you get to a certain sort of degree of flatness, it then becomes a measured distance in relation to, particularly in deserts, of lifting the wind. So it's only in some degree of slope you sort of step, you can. It's not set in concrete you do it that way, but it's one way of thinking about spacing if you have such open country to swale up. You don't often completely design the whole landscape. You might not be lucky enough.
You can't afford to shape the whole landscape. You can rarely afford to catch and store all the water that's possible to do. But you can store as much as you've got money for, that's all. It's the most economical way to store water in the ground and in dams. And a dam is 1/30th the price of water stored in tanks. So you can put up with a little bit of a stomach ache for that.
We've used rocks as borders for our veggie gardens. What would you suggest we use instead as living edges? This is in Tassie. Do the rocks not provide a little thermal mass and mulch? Yes.
Yeah, you could use blue tongues as a living edge and eats all the snails from between the rocks.
Is there a perennial grain cover we could slip in between the rocks?
And the blue tongues.
Pennyroyal?
Yeah, pennyroyal.
Pennyroyal is a great one.
Yeah, next time you kill a pig, you got the pennyroyal right there.
Pennyroyal smells nice when you walk on it.
Nice when you fry it for breakfast too, in blood. Yeah. And your black pudding. We've got a vegetarian hippie on our hands here. It's just
It's an abortive if you take too much of it. If you need an abortive.
yes.
But it's a real distractor to pests as you walk over the Pennyroyal footpaths. It gives off this real minty smell and distracts the smell of the veggies away from the garden, away from the
All
garden
your
pests.
snails are having abortions and you don't get...
I don't know, self-heal? Does self-heal grow down there?
I think so, yeah.
That's a nice ground cover.
Little mat.
How do I harmonise with a massive swath of blackberries?
Harmonise.
Harmonise, which is a wild ox story of Europe, surely.
You must be.
Yeah.
We used to harmonise by putting big wide planks up on them and walking the planks with buckets in our hand picking blackberries. But we always fought over the blackberries with the tiger snakes because the blackberries are very attractive to tiger snakes. Because they've got so much seed, they attract mice, and tiger snakes love mice. So they're down underneath your plank as you're staggering precariously across with your buckets full of blackberries. You used to look down, there's tiger snakes watching you. What are you doing now?
I'm doing a giant pear tree
Oh.
or apple tree.
Buri Bosque. Goes about 90 feet high, that pear. Drops about 7 tons of pears at maturity. Squashes all the blackberries. More than that, it ferments on the ground, and guess what comes in after that? Elephants. That's the end of your blackberries.
Now, if it was lantana, elephants love lantana.
They do.
They
They
just
do.
rip it out.
Worse-
First thing they go for.
Nobody knew that. Worst Circus unloaded some elephants up at Murwillumbah, and there's a clump of lantana across the road, and they went meow straight across and ate the lantana. And people come to me and say, I have this lantana problem. I said, you got elephant deficiency? My father was a very experienced man. He said, but you can keep elephants out of the green bay's door. They hate green bays. I said, how do you know? He said, I've never seen one in a snooker, in a snooker room, you know. That's your solution. And we got that from the Kiowa Valley. You just go in, cut a little thin track into the middle of your blackberry clump, put a whip, unpruned graft of apple, pear, you know, citrus, plum, whatever, and back out, and don't go back again. And when your trees start to yield, your cows go right in, they stamp out your blackberries, totally extinct. Jeff, what's Jeff's name down in Kiowa?
Wallace.
Jeff Wallace did this, and he said to me, you know what I've got to do now? I said, what? He said, I've got to plant bloody blackberries. He can't keep anything out of his fruit trees without the blackberries around them. Yeah.
And they tend to come in and camp here. They can't resist the smell of the fallen apples or pears.
No, it brings them from
And they
miles.
cause a little bit of compaction here and make the tree go very widespready. Shades out the blackberry more and more. Extends the shaded edge. What actually happens is the blackberries go a bit further. And you get this shifting edge of the forest and a mosaic of meadows. And that was originally the white ox of Europe.
No, it wasn't a purple ox. It was an auroch.
So he was wandering around getting the native pears and apples and wobbling that edge, that blackberry edge, that bramble edge. So you've got a moving mosaic of forest,
Cows.
meadows, wobbling its way through the landscape, and this moving edge all the time.
If you drive up through the Kiowa or the snowfields, in Victoria, you'll see all this system in all its stages naturally, due to all the people from Melbourne eating fruit, throwing the cores out the window. You'll see pears and apples coming out of blackberries everywhere. And it isn't long before it attracts cattle. Yeah, well, they climb the trees and eat all the bark off the branches and kill them. But goats will only eat blackberry if you tether them.
What you must realise is the blackberry and the lantana is really a forest edge plant. It's the edge of the forest. And you now have a choice of what sort of forest you're growing. If you wanted something else, you'd easily remove the blackberry and put a more intensive system in. Right. You're not in that position to be that intensive. So the only choice is what type of forest do I want to pioneer, what type of forest do I want to climax over this pioneer plant. The blackberry is a pioneer plant. It's a giant mulch and a hostile one, and it's not friendly to us, like lantana. It's more spiky than lantana. You can't get in amongst it yourself, so you feel excluded.
Lantana, you've got to have little kids and a basket of chocos, and you give them 5 bob to go in and push chocos in to the ground underneath the lantana and stand back. Up comes the chocos all over the lantana. They collapse and the chocos are on the ground. Then you turn your pig in.
If you think about it, it can be a fast-growing pioneer tree, right, that later on you could interplant into other more, sophisticated climax species. You could pioneer it with something that's just very, very fast. It's almost like a shade house, like an acacia.
All the hippie kids used to make a lot of money out of lantana by throwing blankets off their parents' bed over the top, and then they pull it off and catch all the ticks that get on it, put it in a bottle and sell it to the vet to breed anti-tick medicine for dogs. And they'd make $400 or $500 in an afternoon. Get the same kid to put chocos underneath it. You do it, that was well out of lantana, the average hippie kid.
$1 a tick, or more now. Yeah?
Yeah, it's easy to get $1 a tick. There you go. There's a hippie kid talking there.
So you're from Nimbin, you know all about lantana cultivation.
We have tick collectors around Nimbin that regularly go on holidays with the money they earn.
Right.
There you go.
The problem is always the
Well-travelled
solution.
kids.
Okay. What groundwater recharge effect can I expect from swales where the subsoil is limestone?
Subsoil isn't limestone, subsoil is subsoil. Subsoil is terra rossa, red earth in limestone.
Mike,
But if you go put your swales down into limestone, well, there's a nasty sucking sound. And
You know what I've got? I've got soil on top, small bit of clay, and then limestone. It's just limestone underneath. So if I'm soaking the water into that kind of structure, what kind of effects can I expect?
you've got clay over limestone.
yeah, that's fine. But if you get into the limestone, water just disappears. Comes out in distant caves. I've followed limestone caves for miles.
They might seal up after a while with detritus matter, but you really want to grow on the mound below the swale. So what's your depth of clay?
It varies across the property. In some areas it's feet deep, in some areas it's meters deep.
A metre deep,
In some areas it's meters deep,
and other areas,
less than a metre.
right. You just
That
need to do
sounds
some.
okay.
Yeah, you just need to do some core samples and make sure the shallower stuff's on the steeper country. This is New Zealand, yeah? probably. Where it's too steep, you probably have to stay off it, because in New Zealand's a lot of volcanic slopes, a little bit too steep to start earthworking on.
But it's not. You on the hills there going across the Golden Bay or somewhere?
No, it's up on north of Wellsford, so it's not terribly steep.
Hmm. Oh, I'd swale it, because mostly you won't hit the rock. And where you do, or if you think you're going to, you can always put some of your clay back on that and roll it down. And throw a lot of mulch along, that'll chock most things up.
If it's not too large an area, it's possible to make contributions to the swell mound as you build it. Depends how long the swell you're building. To make extra either topsoil
Explain that to me.
contributions or
You mean
manure.
dollar notes or?
Dollar notes. Yeah. So it just depends how large a system we're on. Is there a formula to calculate the max minimum sun angles for a site of a given latitude and
Yes,
altitude?
that's how you do it. You take the latitude, that gives you your sun angles for winter and summer. And if, say, your latitude's 30, 40, 20, whatever, that's the percentage of glass you put in the north-facing wall. So at latitude 30, it's 30% glass. Latitude 40, 40% glass. And then you get a child's protractor, get your sun angles, here's your little house, and don't make it more than 2 rooms deep. Okay, 40 degrees south. 40% of your wall is window. And when the winter sun angle, you've got to hit this centre wall. And the summer sun angle, you've got to miss all walls. It's the simplest thing in the world. You get a little pamphlet from CSIRO, you send to the information officer, 314 Albert Street, Melbourne. And the pamphlet is called Sunlight and Shade. And it gives you these angles for all your latitudes. So it's your latitude, finally, that decides the amount of glass, the amount of sun you let in, and whether you let sun in or not, and how far in you let the sun. I've built a lot of those houses and they work fine. We never light a fire in them. And you're never cold and never hot. If you're in trouble, I'll design it for you. I'm a whiz-bang house designer.
Altitude doesn't affect your sun angles,
No.
but will it affect your temperatures?
Yeah, it does. Unless you're talking about extremes. And when you get to very high altitudes, you just forget all that, open up the centre of the house and glass it over. So you've got a solar courtyard. But otherwise, just work off latitude.
Okay, last question we've got. Broom is a legume and often rated as a hate plant. Would you term this as a pioneer?
Eco-fascist.
In a dry, temperate climate? Any other suggestions in a pasture system that is spreading in? Ben?
It's spreading through.
That the broom is spreading in.
I mean, I know it's not fixing it.
Yeah, it's used throughout Europe to start in forests. If you go to the Black Forest now and drive along the road, you'll see the forests have planted broom where they're going to put forests. And they plant amongst the broom, and the broom dies under the forest, but it fixes nitrogen for the forest, and it's a good mulch for the forest. But it's eco-fascist, hate weed. And if they got there before you, then they probably managed to banish it and you could get fined for having it. They're very punitive, eco-fascists.
Where are you?
Southern New Zealand.
Oh, well, nobody worries too much there.
South Island? South of the South Island. Too cold for Tagasasti? Tree Lucerne?
Bigger, very bit Tagasasti's north of you on the plains there. South of, I've planted it myself there. Whereabouts? Canterbury Plains.
Or Alder is not a legume but fixes nitrogen. And Elaeagnus is not a legume but fixes nitrogen. And Robina pseudoacacia.
You don't want that, you can't get through it, it ripped a piece of a thorn. Tagasasti is nice and soft. And we planted it on the Canterbury Plains, we drilled it in because we gathered it under the old Tagasasti trees and just shook it on a table and got all the seeds out of the soil. 5 years of seed.
We're out of questions.
Jesus, I could think of some. Huh. Is this where you are?
This is where we are. This is one of your favourites too, depressions and basins, clay pans, salt pans and gill guys.
Yeah, gill guys, yeah. I love gill guys. We're in the desert by the look of it, and we're doing landform, aren't we?
Yeah, landscape profile.
Looks like. Yeah. All drainage in the desert has got this name, endorrheic. Endorrheic. Endorrheic drainage. What do you think that means? It means that all drains in deserts go to the interior of the desert and end up in some sort of clay pan. It doesn't go out of the desert. Like, if it's not a desert, drainage goes to the sea. But if it's a desert, it goes to the clay pans and basins, internal basins. America is largely made up of a structure called basin and range. And the water goes to the basins. So desert drainage is all endorrheic. So it all runs in clay pans, carrying very fine silts, and ends up flooding some inner basin with milky water. Takes forever for the silt to settle out. And these basins become deposited of very fine clays called illite clays. Illites. Illite clays are used in agriculture because they hold a lot of water and they stabilise sandy soils. One of the illite clays is...
bentonite.
Thank you. Bentonite. Bentonite, which you use to seal leaks in dams, or you can throw a handful in your cattle trough and fill it up with a sort of a jelly. I've done that. So there you are, endorrheic drainage and clays deposited. And on the way into these basins, the rivers often flood out. These are called floodouts. Floodouts. It's only in Australia really that they're named. And they also often travel through very steep-sided gulches, and wherever you come from, you've got a name for them. Spanish, they're arroyos. In Africa, they're dongas, and so on. And in Australia, they're gullies or gulches. They're gulches in Western and United States too. So you've got rain, runoff starts, erosion creates steep-sided little valleys, a lot of earth comes out with the water, travels over your flood-outs and makes sort of low-slope deltas, and speeds off into the basins and slowly settles out to clear water. And you'll see it all as you drive through deserts. When we recently went up to the coast in West Australia, we kept seeing flat-based basins right through the country with very different coloured vegetation, almost black vegetation growing in them. And if you lose that kid? And they fill up in they're sort of ephemeral basins. They fill up with water, it kills most ordinary shrubs, but not old man saltbush. If you seize the opportunity and run into a basin and throw old man saltbush into the water as it's filling, the saltbush actually germinates underneath the water. It comes up about this high before the water soaks away. It's a great opportunity to build up your forage. And there's plenty of old man saltbush over there. And those basins are very rich in deserts. They grow all sorts of opportunistic plants that get away in water. And in Africa, they're called fleis, V-L-E-I-S. And elsewhere, they're called pans. And they even have their own wildlife. There are deer that inhabit only fleis, so you sort of creep up on fleis, cock your gun, don't shoot yourself in the foot, and it ain't like you see a pair of ears come out of the rushes. And they'll grow very tall grasses. Some of the rushes in the pans in South Australia are way over my head. In effect, fleis are sort of large swales. They fill up with rain and then infiltrate all of it. And probably could be recovered with water-loving trees like pecans. Yeah. You notice interesting things from the air sometimes. You're flying over deserts. I was flying over the Kalahari and I saw lots of little pans and they blow out in winds, and they have a dune shoreline, and this always has a lot of big trees on it. There are two reasons for that. One thing is that sand has no runoff. It's a total absorption system. So a dune on a pavement on clay is a big tank. And that's where the big trees grow. And here you've also got a clay pan which fills periodically, and the water soaks into that dune. But the dune is built out of the clay pan, it blows out of it. And sometimes what blows out of, what's that plasterboard you stick up called?
Gypsum. Sometimes
they're pure gypsum, which is calcium sulphate, isn't it? And gypsum's great stuff. Get a bag of that and scatter it on clay, and it opens it up for a metre to the penetration of water. So gypsum is great to add to clays, a few handfuls just to get water into the ground. Man, you're picking up a lot of data here, all right. Flays. And in Africa, the most common animal in flay is the spring hare. It's quite ordinary hare, but it does spring about a lot. Most hares don't do that unless you put a 22 bull underneath them. Clay pans fill in rain, and you have seasonal swamps, and they are an interesting feature of all deserts because of this endorheic drainage. Yeah. In South Australia, clay pans have become salty because pioneers cut down all the trees around them, and the water table rose, and the salt entering them, water entering them was salty, and then now they've evaporated the water and become salt pans. And you see gentlemen walking around and banking the salt up in the water over there. So it turned from a production system to a salt recovery system. Here's a curious thing now. When you're driving from Cairo down to Alexandria, which I know you're doing fairly often, keep your eye out to the left-hand side of the road, and about halfway to Alexandria, you'll see an old Arab in a dirty nightshirt. I think it's his nightshirt. Could be his jellabah, couldn't it? Yeah. And he's there, and he's got a lot of camels with him. And there are, so this is the road to Alexandria up here. A lot of people. And then there's the slope. There is a kind of a salt pan. Morning. What a good memory I've got. Wadi Natrun, named by the Romans. What do you think Natrun is?
Natural?
No. Romans weren't into natural much. It was more like throwing Christians to lions and stuff. Sodium. Yeah. Sodium Lake. And these are dunes, and here's my Arab mate. I actually don't know his name, but I know a lot about him. And he has piled the sand up and made narrow valleys right up from Wadi Natrun. He's got it on his own. He's the only bloke there. And in there he's planted date palms, which are thriving. Where you plant a date is where the feet are in water and the head's in fire. So you organise that pretty well there. But the other thing he's planted here is a water-loving plant called Taifa. And there's lots of camels here too. I don't know if I can draw a camel. Yeah, not doing too bad. And you'll notice with the camels that he's got, they're called ships of the desert. And he's got little sails on them, but the sails are hanging underneath the camel. He doesn't know much about setting a sail. And this is the udder of the camel inside the sail. And this means that the little baby camel can't suck its mother. So maybe they're not sows after all, they might simply be, what is it called? Bra. That's the camel's bra. And it weans the young. They put it on to wean the kids. Now the camels are eating the taifa. And they've been chomping along here, chompy, 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 in a total desert, a sandy desert, abundant green forage from taifa. They yield very well for milk. Young ones grow very well. You had about 200 or 300 camels there. Did you come and look at this?
Yeah.
You found it all right?
Yeah.
Did you talk to him?
Yeah. No, I didn't talk. Well, Nadia talked to him.
I said, "What sort of camels are these?" You got them for racing. He said, "Oh, you don't race these camels." I said, "Are they a riding camel?" No, not these. What do you do with these camels? We eat them. These are beef camel. I said, what do you call the breed? This is Mahalebi. Now, a lot of things are Mahalebi because the Mahaleb is just an area. That breeds things, you know. So you've got Mahalebi camel, browsing taifa. You've got dates growing. He makes a lot of money out of dates. He makes a real lot of money out of camels, about $500,000 he told me in that lot he's rearing there. And he's doing this on the drainage down to a very salty lake. So what he has realised and is showing that all this is fresh water. It's not till it gets to Wadi Natruan and evaporates that it turns into extremely salty water. And I was struck by that man's ability to make a lot of money out of a very unpromising situation. I had 5 PhDs in agriculture with me in the car, and I'm ashamed to have to tell you that they not only didn't they know what sort of a camel it was, they didn't know there were sorts of camels. And the other thing they didn't know, they couldn't tell taifa from sorghum. I said, how do you guys get PhDs in agriculture when you don't know you ask from a hole in the ground? And they said, we all got our PhDs by looking through microscopes and being geneticists, so they don't know anything outside. Take their microscope away, they can't tell what's what. Pretty strange, actually. The old boy was a great agriculturalist and a nice man too. So you see old fellas in dirty nightshirts, they're the boys you want to talk to. You got anyone with a PhD from the university? Forget it.
That's it, Bill.
This guy's a successful agriculturalist, a very successful agriculturalist.
What Nadia said was there were also milk in the camels, and it's a very high quality milk that you get from camels. In fact, it's said in Arabia that camel milk and dates is a whole food you can survive on very well.
Yeah.
So if you've got a bag of dates and a camel you can milk, you can ride across the desert and survive really well. Well, it's a much more appropriate animal than cattle out in the dry lands with no cloven
and
foot.
There is a good market for them. They're $700 each in the Middle East, our camels, because Arabian camels now have VD. Sorry to tell you that. VD. You'll just have to change your mind about that. And so they can't breed them. They're not breeding very successfully. So they pay a lot for Australian camels, which are free of sin. And wages of sin. decent, upright camels.
Yeah, the princess, queen, well, the king's wife, yeah. and his auntie, Princess Basma, are trying to encourage people to import Australian camels for camel transport systems and the traditions of camel racing and different things, which is kind of dying out.
And so they'll have good moral animals.
Okay, let's go. 1, 2, 3.